Welcome everyone to this section of Guided Notes. This is talking about the cell structure and function, but specifically we're talking about the cell theory and the diversity of cells. So what the heck is a cell? The cell was kind of first discovered by a scientist by the name of Robert Hooke. Robert Hooke was a scientist from England. He was like the head of the the Royal Society of Science, I believe is the title of it. It's kind of like our National Science Foundation that you see on your PBS shows when you're a kid. He was involved with that. He was the first one to look at thing under a slide, and he looked at a piece of cork, so like the cork from a wine bottle, and he looked and he saw an image something like this. And he saw all these little tiny like dots, and he said, boy, those things are very uniform. They kind of remind me of a cell or a room of a monk's chambers or a monastery. But he was so he's the one who named the cell. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. But they started looking at things under the microscope, and this is a microscope like that he came up with, that you have a light, here's his light source, here is a lens that focuses, and then we have some optics that magnify things. So these are some scientists that kind of came up with this. Antoine van Leeuwenhoek, this was his microscope, and you put a little tiny drop of water right there on that point. You could adjust it up and down, and then you could focus it in and out. And like it's showing in the picture, he holds it up to his eye, and then the light kind of shines in. And he started looking at pond water and bacteria in his teeth, and he was able to kind of see that there's things that we can't normally see. What looks like a normal piece of a drop of water has lots of living things. So he was the first person to see a living specimen under the microscope. Hooke saw like empty cells. It was dried up, it's dead plant. But Leeuwenhoek was the first to kind of see living stuff. So there was 3 scientists that kind of looked at, came up with some things from their discoveries and came up with some conclusions. So there's a guy by the name of Schleiden, found that plants are made up of cells. All plants are made up of cells. Then there was another scientist by the name of Schwann that said that all animals are made of cells. And then there was a guy by Virchow that concluded that all new cells come from existing cells. And the combination of those 3 scientists' kind of conclusion statements came up with what we now determine to be the cell theory. So what are the 3 parts of the cell theory? Here they are. You should know these. You should know these. You should know these. These will be on this graded quiz that is going to be on Monday or Tuesday. You expect to see these multiple times. This is important. So the cell theory is made up of 3 parts. All living things are composed of cells. All living things have cells. Cells are the basic unit of life. Lots of small cells combine to make you, but they are the basic unit of life. And all cells come from existing cells. There's not this spontaneous generation of cells. Okay, it came from something else. It came from another cell through something called mitosis or meiosis that we'll get to later in the year. These are the 3 components of the cell theory. You should know these 3 things. All living things are composed of cells. Cells are the basic unit of life, and all cells come from existing cells. So how do we look at these things? Well, we have a compound light microscope. This is what we have in the classroom. This is what you used in class the other day, or you will be using in class depending on when you watch this. These are relatively cheap, $100, $200. We can buy a decent one that we can put on your lab bench for you to use. They're pretty neat because you can look at both dead and living things. So you can see things like moving and swimming a lot of times, or sometimes I should say. But they got to be really thin because the light shines up. Here's our light source, and the light shines up, and it has to shine up through it in order to get to your eye. So they have to be sliced very thin. Okay, like you can't stick your finger under there and see it well because the light won't shine through it. Now, if you want to get to some cool images, you should look up like electron microscope images. I would recommend TEM for transmission electron microscope, TEM. that'd be a good search for you. There are some really cool images like of spiders or bee stingers and stuff like that. Super cool, super detailed, because we can get magnification on the magnitudes of like hundreds of thousands of magnification, where like for us, we can get a magnification of 400, which is pretty good. Like it appears 400 times larger, but with these electron microscopes, we're even more, but way more expensive. We don't have any of these. These are probably $1 million, or in that ballpark, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe we should say, in order to get one. At least they were back in the day. Okay, really expensive, really cool, for a high school science classroom. We don't have one. Okay, now there's two different basic classifications of cells. We have something called prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, and it's kind of two divisions and two branches. Now, realize that cells are very different. If we look at this picture, we have lots of, these are cells. Here's a cell, here's a cell, here's a cell, here's a cell. These are all different cells, but notice they look very different. There's this idea of form and function, and the form or the shape of this object helps it perform the function that it does. Same thing here, form and function. Okay, so huge difference is in size from 5 to 50 micrometers. That's what micro is, micrometers. But keep in mind that how big is 50 micrometers? It's the diameter of a hair. So a big cell, 50 micrometers, is about the width of a hair, of a human hair, which is pretty small when you stop to think about it. But all cells have 4 characteristics in common. They have all 4 of these things. No matter if it's a prokaryotic cell or a eukaryotic cell, just for the record, you pronounce this as eukaryotic. U is U, like Y-O-U. You pronounce it like that. Eukaryotic cells. And they have all cells have these 4 things. Now there's some differences, and that's what we're going to talk about. So prokaryotic and eukaryotic, so we have 2 different categories, and really the thing we're looking for is whether they contain a nucleus or not. And what is a nucleus? It's a large membrane that is structure that contains DNA. Eukaryotes have a nucleus. Prokaryotes do not. That's the distinguishing factor. This is a prokaryote. This is a eukaryote. Here is the nucleus right there. There is no nucleus in that structure. Okay, prokaryotes have a nucleus. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Eukaryotes have a nucleus, prokaryotes do not. So prokaryotes, generally smaller, no nucleus, but they're generally smaller than eukaryotic cells. They do have genetic information. Notice they have DNA, but it's not in the nucleus. They go through all the basic functions of life. They grow, they reproduce, they respond to the environment. Sometimes they move, sometimes they don't. That's what this thing is. This is called a flagella. It's a tail that allows it to move. They carry out all the same functions of life. There's just no nucleus. Bacteria are the classic examples of prokaryotic cells. Of all living things on Earth in present day, bacteria are really the only prokaryotic cells that we have that are still around. So bacteria are prokaryotes. You are a eukaryote. Remember, this is pronounced Y-O-U. You are a eukaryote, which means you have a nucleus. Now, the true definition is they contain specialized membrane-bound organelles, but the classic thing that we talk about is they have a nucleus. They're generally bigger, they're more complex, they have more stuff, they have genetic information. DNA is just housed in the nucleus. Now, there's different types of eukaryotic cells, and that's what this is talking about. So we have plant cells and we have animal cells. Now, depending upon what we're talking about, depends upon what characteristics they have. These are both eukaryotic cells because they have a nucleus and they have a nucleus. That makes them a eukaryotic cell. Now, they're different, they have different things, but they're still eukaryotes. Notice how fungi, mushrooms, are not listed as plants. Those are a separate classification of organisms. So that's the difference kind of between prokaryotes, eukaryotes, as well as kind of some basic parts of the cell theory. If you have any questions, please let us know.